Fanfiction. You hear the word and a lot of things might come to mind, depending on your experience with the diverse world of fan-created content. You might consider it to be a negative thing, a fun hobby, a guilty pleasure. Whatever your association with the word, the likelihood is that you've had some sort of run-in with it, whether you know it or not. My name is Jessica Chen, and I'm here to talk about why fanfiction should be considered a form of literature, and the impact that fanfiction has had on society. There's some controversy surrounding the modern world of fanfiction. Some authors and creators embrace it, such as Joss Whedon. Others are even appreciative towards it, since more and more published authors are admitting that they started off writing fanfics before their writing career. On the opposite side, we have authors such as Anne Rice, who stated in a message to fans, "I do not allow fanfictions. The characters are copyrighted. It upsets me terribly to even think about fanfiction with my characters." And who, semi-famously, had fanfiction of her works removed from all fanfiction websites, with authors under fear of lawsuit. There is also the case of Diana Gabaldon, who, while not as extreme as Anne Rice, did state, "Beyond the specific arguments against the concept remains the unfortunate fact that a terrible lot of fanfic is outright cringeworthy and ought to be suppressed on purely aesthetic grounds." While these might sound extreme, they are sentiments commonly echoed by those in society who are against fanfiction. These are some of the sentiments and comments that I'm going to be fighting against over the course of this episode. To make sure we're on the same page, I'm going to backtrack a little. So, what exactly is fanfiction? Essentially, it is fan-created fiction. It's when fans write something based off of their continuation or reinterpretation of an already established fictional world. For example, in my English class, we had to write fan fiction as one of our assignments. It wasn't called that, but the assignment was we had to choose one of the stories that we read earlier in the class. One where we found the ending of the story to be unsatisfying. And then we had to write a new ending. Continue from where the story officially ended, and then bring it to a new, satisfying conclusion. That is, essentially, fanfiction. Continuing from where the author stopped, elaborating on the story. Some well-known examples of published fanfic would be things like 50 Shades of Grey, or Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. But you might be surprised to hear that fanfiction actually has a much earlier start than those. Dante's Divine Comedy, for example, is a work of fanfiction. Paradise Lost by Milton, the Aeneid by Virgil, Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare even. And actually, most of Shakespeare's works are fanfiction. And then to top it all off, we have the countless retellings of King Arthur, numerous spin-offs of Sherlock Holmes, and for another modern example, practically every Disney movie. Even the modern idea of fanfiction, which is what I'll be referring to from here on out, is somewhat older than most people probably think. It started back in the 1960s with the release of Star Trek, the original series. Committed fans, most of them women, and particularly women in STEM fields, founded and cultivated fan websites online when the internet was barely started. And they even had a fanfiction magazine circulating. They were kind of the start of the modern idea of fandoms, and particularly the online community. All of this, however, begs the question. If fan fiction is so old, so widely known and loved, if some are considered classics, taught in schools, if some of it even helped shape society and culture, then why does fan fiction have such a bad reputation now? To be honest with you, I couldn't really find a direct answer to that. It could be because of a simple misunderstanding of what fanfiction is. Some of my research suggested that it's because of the stereotype of it being something young teenage girls indulge in. It could be because of the modern popular subgenres of it, with romantic and sexually explicit fanfiction being the type most people seem to think of when it's brought up. However, while on the topic, I would like to point out that while everybody is so quick to jump on fan fiction for those, nobody wants to talk about all the romantic, sexually explicit, and frankly, much more horribly written adult novels that are published and sold in most bookstores. But moving on. Most author-made criticisms of fan fictions that I've read for this seem to focus on slash fanfiction, which slash fanfiction is what the community calls fics that focus on romantic and sexual pairings. The authors specifically like to use the words indulgence and fantasy to criticize fanfic authors. But at its heart, what is any form of fiction except for indulgence, except for fantasy? And what creator has the authority to say, well, yes, this indulgence is fine, but this over here absolutely is not? Another word they like to use is immoral, to which again I say, have you looked at the adult fiction section lately? Even some of the young adult fiction. Quite frankly, we have more to gain from allowing fan fiction to be considered a form of literature than we do by keeping it as some silly thing that girls who aren't real writers do. Girls who can't create their own characters, as some authors claim. What we would gain is opening the doors for budding authors to be validated and supported in their craft, giving them more freedom to pursue and talk about their hobby instead of being considered people who just write fan fiction. If we tell these people that they are writers, they are authors. If we validate them, we allow them the freedom and the ability to grow and become more confident writers without shame and stereotypes attached. Fan fiction allows you to explore controversies, opinions, feelings, and scenarios that you just don't get to explore in traditional published books. To many authors, it is a safe place where they can explore specific things or give specific representation and use beloved characters to do so. Fan fiction gives you a flexibility that you don't otherwise have. One of my favorite quotes from a Time magazine article states that fan fiction is what literature might look like if it were reinvented from scratch after a nuclear apocalypse by a band of brilliant pop culture junkies trapped in a sealed bunker. They don't do it for money. That's not what it's about. The writers write it and put it up online just for the satisfaction. They're fans, but they're not silent, couch-bound consumers of media. The culture talks to them, and they talk back to the culture in its own language. And really, that's what fan fiction is at its heart. It is a deepening and advancement of culture. It is people finding what they love most out of all of the vast available information and going, how can I contribute? How can I continue this? How can I keep this thing that I love alive just a little bit longer? And why should they be made to feel shame and embarrassment for that? Fan fiction should be considered a form of literature because when you boil it down to its most basic values, fan fiction is an expansion of literature. After compiling all this research, I decided to reach out to the fan fiction community itself, to hear from the authors their own opinions and experiences, their own thoughts on this entire topic. I was honestly blown away by the responses. Some of them were so in-depth, I almost feel like they could have done a better job of this than me. I'd like to start my closing with a couple of their comments. User Smiley5494 from the platform Archive of Our Own said, "The way I see it is that fanfics are a declaration of love for a work. It is the fans' way of saying, we are here, we see what you have given us, and here is what we can give back. Here is how much your story has affected me and hundreds of fans like me." And user Rona23, also from the platform Archive of Our Own, said, "What we call fan fiction is literature for the poor. It's food for hobby readers and school for authors." Fan fiction has the power to shape culture, to shape society. And contrary to what some published authors say about it, fan fiction isn't cringeworthy. So really, what's actually stopping us from calling modern fan fiction a form of literature and tearing down the stereotypes that have been so commonly and often wrongly attached to it? Thank you for your time.